Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. So, my intuition said that we should have a conversation about intuition and intelligence. So, I was wondering, do you have a definition for intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, for me, intelligence is just being able to take information but process it through your own sentience. In other words, consulting your own intuition and experiences and wisdom, and turning it into something new. Because if you're not sentient and if you don't have intuition, if you don't have wisdom, then you're not really intelligent. You're just a parrot. You're just reflecting back what was programmed into you. So there has to be some sort of a real consciousness to the process where you almost enter into the information and live it and run it through your very being, in a way that corresponds to the higher ordering and logic and reason that exists within the greater reality. In other words, like to be a reflection of the divine logos, I guess, as the Greeks would say it. The divine mind. It has to be part of that God spark within you that changes it, that transforms it. That's what it is to me.
So, I heard three things that stood out. One, something about sentience, something about originality, like you're able to create original thought or something like that. You can have original creativity, but there's a reflection of what I would call truth with a capital T. You called
Mhm.
it logos. Could you please tell me more about what you mean by sentience?
Yeah, for me, sentience. Well, the thing about sentience is you don't have to be aware of any information. You don't even have to perceive. If you just close your okay, if you just were to be sucked into a void, for example, a void where you don't have a body, you don't have anything around you, you don't even have an environment, you would still have awareness. You would still have awareness proving that you exist. And I think that's like the purest. If you boil it all down, that's the purest essence, I think, of being a sentient being. Just the very fact that you can be conscious, that you can be aware. So for me, that's where it starts. And but you need that in order to also be aware of your internal states, like what your intuition is telling you, how you feel about something, to be able to reason. I think you have to be present, and you have to exist, and you have to be a being that can perceive and be cognizant of an idea. So to me, that's what being sentient means.
Okay. So I heard something about just like literal the awareness of being, meaning you have to truly be, which means that are you arguing that if you're not a real human, you can't be intelligent?
Yeah, not in a truly intelligent way. That's why they call it artificial intelligence, because it appears like it's intelligent, but it actually isn't, because it's artificial. And so it's able to calculate, it's able to compare, remember, compare and contrast, but it can't truly think, can't truly contemplate, can't truly intuit or enter into the idea as part of its being. Like it can't feel it out necessarily. It can just rearrange things on a superficial level.
Yeah. So I was going to define intuition, and I'm going to close my eyes to see if I can come up with a new definition than before.
Sure.
It's interesting. So I saw that you're open and you just receive what comes, which is very similar to what you're talking about in terms of intelligence, like some sort of being a reflection of logos or truth. To me, I used to tell people that your intuition is your spiritual GPS system. So if you just follow it, if you follow it, you should be able to complete your spiritual mission or be on track with your spiritual mission. And another way that I see that now is I would say that your intuition is the intelligence of your true self. So nowadays, I talk much more about, in the past, I used to teach much more about like thinking and feeling and intuition, like what are those three, how are they related, etc. Now I think and teach more on this level of your false self versus your true self. And so your false self is obviously your ego or just whoever you think you are, whatever you're acting, and your true self. Another way to look at it is, I guess you could see it as your soul, but I don't really see it like that. I don't really see it like that. I'm not even sure if we'd have to agree on what soul means, but I see it as the self that you feel you are when you're truly liberated. And it's the self that you can still interact with this world on this earth plane, you know? And I think soul is so much deeper than that, right? That like, so your true self is more like you being on track with your spiritual mission or you being in your full power. And I would say that the boundaries of your true self are liberating, and the boundaries of your false self are painful and imprisoning you. And therefore, when you follow your intuition, it helps you be your true self, or your true self is the intelligence of your, wait, what did I say? Your intuition is the intelligence of your true self. So I think that's what resonates with me more now. Your intuition is the intelligence of your true self. I'm curious how that lands with you.
Yeah, I do think that's pretty essential, because if you just say like, if you just focus just purely on, how to improve your intuition, how to be able to listen to yourself more, if you just say that to someone, then I think it's very easy for them to mistake other things, other impulses, other feelings for their intuition if they haven't yet distinguished between their true self and their false self, you know? Because like some people, they think, oh, I'm just me. There's no necessarily true or false self within me. I'm just me. So whatever I feel, that's independent of logic, that seems to come from outside of me, or some other part of me that isn't just my everyday conscious mind. That's what my intuition is. Well, in some cases, you know, like in the case of like suggestibility, hypnotic programming, advertising, we're being influenced in all sorts of ways that are subconscious, you know, that are beneath the level of consciousness. And if we mistake that as our intuition, then we're going to be easily led around towards other false signals, other false selves out there that are manipulating us, right? And so I think what you said is very critical, because it automatically says, hey, watch out, there is a false self and there is a true self. And so true intuition is that which comes from the true self, and that leads us towards being more and more of our true self, and that's the measure of it. And so like in life, if you follow your intuition and it ends up being wrong or leads you down false path or whatever, I mean, a lot of times that kind of shows that that wasn't actually intuition, and you need to be a little more discerning about how to distinguish the real from the false. And I think that's what the main challenge is, you know, to make that distinction. So it's good.
Hmm. I'd say that a lot of, in terms of distinguishing false intuition from true intuition, comes from experience. But in the moment, a lot of it, in my opinion, has to do with vibes. So if you receive what is an intuition in quotation marks, you haven't determined yet if it's true or not. If there's some sort of weird thing happening alongside it, like there's a thought that makes you feel bad about yourself, or you know, something weird, I would say that's not intuition. It's probably an implant or a suggestion or a psychic attack, or you know, something like that. Because even if you receive an intuition that says something like really incredible, like you know, you've been married for 30 years and your intuition's like, my husband's cheating on me, you know, like something that would just break your world apart. That breaks your false self's world apart, because it's probably your false self that got into this marriage, etc. So even if you get an intuition that like breaks your world apart and it's devastating news, you'll probably feel calm and peace when you receive that intuition, because your true self is not bothered at all that maybe it's time to end this 30-year marriage, you know? So like that's how I would talk about determining true self intuition versus, or true intuition from many other kinds of things that masquerade as intuition. I'm kind of curious about you, like.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, the false signals, for me, they tend to be steeped in ego, you know, some sort of a neurotic insecurity that it's more of it's more of like a thought loop, and it's kind of like more mechanical. It feels like an artificial intelligence almost, like a repeating hypnotic script, more so than true intuition, which to me feels like it feels deeper within. It feels broader. It feels more whole, like from the top to the bottom of my being. You know, it's always there in the background, and all I have to do is just finally admit to it. Like, yeah, I know that's how it is. But my conscious mind might want to be like, no, but I'm not going to think about that right now. But I mean, the back of my mind says, oh, that's how it is. That's how I feel deep down, and that's what it is. But my conscious mind says, nope, I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to stick in wishful thinking and just ignore it, right? Whereas the false signal is almost the opposite, where the inner background part is like, oh, look out, boy, this is not going to work out for you. but the conscious mind in that case is it's more like yeah, the conscious mind just wants to believe what it believes. So yeah, there's definitely a difference, and I think true intuition feels, like I said, deeper, broader, and more 100% my true self. Like it's if I were to tell myself, okay, if you're being fully honest with yourself, like no pretenses, no ego, no wishful thinking, how do you really feel? Like just drop all the masks. How do you really feel? That to me tends to be true intuition right now. Whereas the false stuff tends to be more like I'm gonna ignore my true warnings about it being false and just I want to stick to that false idea. So it's like superficial versus deep. That's how it feels to me.
So do you actually have like a practice where you're like, okay, is this real intuition? And you just kind of do your test where you just like strip everything away and like do that test. Do you do that?
Yeah, I do. And like I said, the false stuff tends to feel more contracted, more hurried, more impatient. It's almost like
Yeah.
it feels almost like a con artist or a salesman just trying to close a sale on you. Just feels like hurry, 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 like think this, act on it now. Whereas true intuition is way more patient. It's more like it's always there in the background. It's always like whispering, like as like a nice, kind advisor. Saying like, hey, this is just how it is. If you want to accept it, then you accept it. If you don't, you don't. And it's very easy for that reason to miss it sometimes because it's in the back of your mind, but consciously you're not always recognizing it unless you were perceptive and honest with yourself.
So interesting. I would say the same things, but in such different ways. Like I would say that intuition is true with a capital T. So it has that it has that reflection of what is, let's say, ultimately true. And therefore it can be patient because it doesn't have to prove anything to anyone, like it just exists there like math. Like math exists and it explains everything. You can't argue against it and you can't create a new one that's false. Math just is, and so like I feel like intuition is like that. Like you can listen to it or you cannot at detriment to you, but it's up to you. It doesn't need you. It doesn't need anything from you.
Mhm.
And I think that's interesting. But I would explain it very differently than you. I think we see it similarly. As intuition is in my case, I would say intuition is truth with a capital T. And also what you were saying, how I would reflect back to you what you said in the way that I used to say it in the past is you said something about like there's some sort of convincing attitude of like, let's say a thought, like a false intuition, like is like a car salesman, or you said something like that, right? Like where it's like looping. To me, what I would say is true intuition is usually a surprise. So if it's a thought you've had before, that's not intuition. And if it's like an old feeling as well, especially this is what I tell people when they don't understand when they're under psychic attack or not. It's like, if you're under psychic attack, most likely this feeling you have, it feels bad and it feels old. It feels really old. Like if you feel like a lot of shame, for example, is like this really old feeling of, in some cases, they just want to hide and disappear, or in other cases, they just feel really, really bad about themselves and they want to hurt themselves. Like it depends on the person. But that's my way of reflecting back to you what you said, which is similar, but it's like we have two different worlds and then we're talking about the same thing through
I mean the
English.
language is different. The language is different. And I mean what you described I also have experienced. It's just when I went about describing it, I just came at it from a different angle, because I was kind of grasping for how to put something like that into words, because we're dealing with nonverbal phenomena. Ultimately we're dealing with nonverbal things, right? So the language is going to differ.
What's interesting is as you know, I kind of only live by intuition as much as possible and I hardly think. And then as you also know, I forget everything, like everything. And the version of me who was like a straight A student who really cared and was really proud about whatever university I went to and all that kind of stuff, I just don't care about that at all. And so there's a kind of false intelligence I feel that this world celebrates and forces you into. So it's not even true intelligence, which is what you defined at the top of this conversation. And it has nothing to do with intuition whatsoever. So I'm kind of curious, could you like define what this false intelligence that the world seems to celebrate or inculcate in you? Like, what is that? And how can you compare, contrast it with what you think of as like true intelligence?
Yeah, well, so when you talked about true, or when you talked about intelligence being tied, well, I think true intelligence cannot exist without some level of intuition. Because if intuition is tied to truth with a capital T, then if that's your GPS, then the intellect by itself is just like a navigator. Okay, he's just a navigator, steering a ship or hiking somewhere, right? It's just the navigator, and the navigator has to have either a map or a compass, or ideally both, in order to objectively get to the final destination where he or she needs to go. And so without intuition, the person can go somewhere, they can make progress, but they're not necessarily going to go in the right direction. And I think intellect without true intuition is basically what we have going on nowadays in society and universities and everywhere, where there is no objective compass to what is being thought about or researched or developed, because like everyone is like parroting everyone else. They're just repeating what they've learned in school, what they're and even if they make new discoveries, like in science, for example, you accidentally hit upon a new discovery. In the end, politics, personal biases, who funds you, who doesn't fund you, all those things are once again based on false intelligence, based on sometimes not even the lack of intuition, but a sort of purposefully false intuition, in the sense of either cultural programming, ego-based biases, or psychic attacks, the things that are steering the course of intellectual discourse within the research community, within universities. There's things that are purposely squashing certain ideas and certain lines of thought and amplifying other lines of thought towards false ends, for whatever negative agenda reasons. And so what's being celebrated is the ability to exist within that false intellectual environment, to be like I'm a PhD because I've contributed a lot to this false field with my own false ideas, and I help to reinforce the consensus. So I'm Mr. Consensus person. That's what I am. And so so if someone wants to do a podcast or cite someone, they cite me because I am the expert in this field of BS. I mean, not to say it's not useful for building things, but I'm saying when it comes to truth with a capital T, I think it's divorced from that most of the time. So true intelligence is grounded in objective truth, and therefore it's always going to go against the consensus if the consensus is false. Like, it doesn't subscribe to authority, to consensus, to groupthink. But consensus, groupthink, and authority are the exact things that are celebrated by the world of false intelligence.
Listening to you talk, I get this idea that I wonder if you'd agree with this or not, that in order for you to be, in quotation marks, like truly intelligent, you have to have almost like your own worldview of how things are. So that means if you believe in a religion that was passed down to you, and you're like really gung-ho about this religion, you're not intelligent, because you're not creating your own like lived experience tested against your own intuition view of how the world is and how it functions. And it's only within this, like, let's say, original to you, but probably resonates with other people who also have intelligence, but original to you and your life experience, your view of how the world is. If you don't have that, then you don't have true intelligence. It almost sounds like you're saying that. Is that, what do you think about that?
Yeah, because when you mentioned intuition being surprising, well, surprising means it's information. Well, it's something that comes to you that you hadn't realized up to this point, and perhaps not even realized based on everything you've seen, experienced, learned up to that point. So it's truly something from the outside, right? And so when it comes to for example, making progress in science or music or spirituality, even philosophy and religion, yeah, if you don't have that intuitive component, you're just going to be recycling the same old.
Yes.
And nothing's going to be truly surprising. It's only going to be surprising in the way of like, oh, I reordered the pieces in a different way that I hadn't reordered it before, but it's still the same pieces. You're still within the box. You're still within the circle. And so the only thing that can really take you out of it is something that's already outside of all that stuff. And that's why it has to be the truth. It has to be the truer part of your being. That's beyond all this.
You know what's interesting about what we're talking about so far is when we're talking about both intuition and intelligence, a lot of what we're coming to is this idea of an absolute kind of truth, a truth with a capital T that exists outside of anything we've been taught or we've been raised in. And I'm not sure anyone's ever described or defined intuition or intelligence, especially intelligence in this way with me. Intuition maybe, just because, you know, I'm in that world a lot, and I personally taught a lot about intuition, but intelligence kind of being one and the same. To me, what we're talking about so far sounds like, to me, I wonder what you think about this, that intuition to me is clearly feminine. To me, you receive it, right? It comes from outside of you and you receive it, and you just know if it's true or not based on the things within you. But intelligence to me feels more like it has to do with your ability to navigate this world, like this dimension, this world that you're in, and some of the mechanics of that. And so it's almost like your intelligence is like the engineer or the masculine container to help. In my opinion, your intelligence must help your intuition make your life decisions for you. Like your intuition receives the idea, which is essentially the decision for you. And then your intelligence helps you do that idea forthright into the world. You know, it's sort of like the feminine and masculine components are the same thing, which is adherence to truth with a capital T, or integrity or fidelity to truth with a capital T. And truth with a capital T, which we haven't talked about so much right now, but I will, is beautiful. You know, like, you know, the sacred geometry of this world is beautiful, and art is beautiful. And if art has truth, it's beautiful. If music has truth, it's beautiful. And so it's almost like intuition and intelligence, there's some sort of correlation with beauty as well, which I also think is really interesting. I'm kind of curious what you have to say about this. So I was talking about like intelligence being masculine and intuition being feminine, and maybe intuition coming first and intelligence coming secondarily to like support the intuition, and both having some sort of adherence to truth, and truth being beautiful.
Yeah.
I said a lot. I'm curious what you think about that.
No, I mean, spot on, because so the thing is like in mathematics, right? You got this thing, the golden ratio. The golden ratio is the number 1.618, you know, some more numbers, but it's a ratio between a certain length and a part of the length, so that this to this is this to, I mean, it's like a proportion that scales up no matter what scale you're talking about. Small scales, large scales, you always got the same ratio. And it's something that therefore ripples throughout all of creation, from the biggest ultimate scale of creation down to the smallest tiny subatomic thing. You have the self-similar kind of fractal almost proportion that ripples up through it. And so no matter where you are within the level of the illusion, you're always going to get a reflection of the higher within that. And so when we're talking about music, physical appearance, a beautiful idea, you know, a landscape, whatever, whenever we see beauty, I think we're getting glimpses of truth that exists beyond this level of illusion. And the part of us that is beyond the level of the illusion recognizes it. And so it has this feeling of harmony, of communion with the higher thing, with the divine, concordance, you know, the whole resonance between the lower and the higher, as above, so below, and as below, so above. That whole thing, we're reminded of it anytime we see something beautiful or true or good. I mean, that's why the Greeks, you know, valued truth, beauty, and goodness, because it's all in harmony and proportion, because they're all part of the same thing. And that totally ties into intelligence and intuition, because intelligence and intuition for us, it's almost like those are our sense organs of the true, the good, the beautiful, the objective, and in a higher way, you know. So see, the eyes of the soul, the eyes of of consciousness is what is needed to perceive that. And so if you don't have that within, then you might not care about beauty, you might not care about truth, you might not care about goodness. And that's why we have institutions, cultures, people that are, you know, they exist within lies, they propagate lies, you know, the things that they represent are ugly, you know, and they're not good people. You know, we have that because it's almost like a shadow reflection of reality itself. And you know, and we ourselves, our ego, our shadow, is kind of like that. It resonates with that stuff. And then the higher part of our being resonates with the true, the good, and the beautiful. And that's sort of like the distinction that we have to make.
So interesting what you're talking about. What comes to mind is this. So the culture that we do live in, which if we think about it as diametrically opposed to, to truth with a capital T, then it's evil. So the culture we live in, it celebrates a lot of evil. And one thing I did mention to you before we even talked about this was something like plastic surgery, you know, not to be
Mhm.
either pro or against plastic surgery per se, but just the idea of trying to get at beauty, but bypassing truth. So,
Hmm.
so it's like wanting the results, but not having the way through that is the, in quotation marks, like the naturally occurring way. And so there's like a forced way, which to me is very similar to, you know, like cheating when you're doing like a foot race and cheating and you win at the end. So you get the appearance of winning, but you didn't do the thing all the way through to the end. You could even
Mhm.
say this, I mean, this might be a whole other topic, but about money versus abundance, you know? So there's this idea that like you want to have a lot of money. Does that mean you have abundance? Probably not. You probably have intense fear around money, even if you have like billions of dollars. You know what I mean? So that kind of abundance
Mhm.
that you might have been seeking through the money, you're not achieving. Just like you can, in quotation marks, like win the race, but you didn't have the experience within of what it takes to like train and actually have, you know, the mental and the physical to win that race, and et cetera. So like there's some sort of like bypassing of actual experience for the end result, for the packaging of it, which seems to be pretty endemic in our culture. I'm curious what goes off in your brain about that, because what's really interesting to me about this whole conversation about intuition and intelligence is that truth with a capital T seems to just be like anchoring the whole dang thing, and ugliness being like an opposite, and how we're like seeped in ugliness as a result. But people don't see that, you know, because they see the surface level package that is made to not be ugly per se. Anyway, I won't talk more. I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah. All right. So like once a person no longer has a grounding to a higher objectivity, once they lose that GPS signal,
Yeah.
then they can convince themselves that north is south and south is north. You know, they can turn ugliness into beauty just through group consensus and by convincing themselves and convincing each other that, oh, that ugly thing, that's the beautiful thing, that's the popular thing, that's the thing that, you know, we should all strive for. And so, you know, to a degree, society can be turned upside down with inverted values, which, you know, I mean, frankly, we're seeing, that's what we're seeing. That's what a lot of society is nowadays. But the thing is, there's always going to be certain people, and there's always going to be a certain part within the people that have the ability for it, that recognize that it's wrong and they reject it. And so, as much as the lie wants to usurp the truth, it's never going to be 100% successful. And it seems to me that throughout history, that has been a very dominant dynamic of the people of the lie trying to foist that on everyone else, and trying, like I said, to usurp the truth, to usurp reality itself, you know, like trying to substitute their false reality for the real reality, you know, and trying to convince us that their reality is the real reality, and that therefore they, who position themselves as the kings and the priests and the, you know, the leadership of the false reality, is our God, you know, is our leadership. When in reality we can feel deep down, no, it's, of course it's not. You know, they may call themselves the elite or the most popular people, but, you know, fact of the matter is they're not. And I think it hinges on enough people within society, within humanity as a whole, hopefully, to recognize that and to shift their map, their compass, their GPS towards the real signal within themselves, so that everything around it, you know, culture, philosophy, the way we go into the future is based on a true direction, you know, towards truth, goodness, and beauty, and not this inverted, false, alternate reality that they've been trying to substitute that with.
This leads me to the question. I have some thoughts on this already, but I'm kind of curious what you have to say about like what is gained from co-opting all of reality. You know, you co-opt all of reality and you
Mhm.
substitute it with a false reality. What do you gain from that? You know,
Yeah.
and I already have my ideas, but I'm really curious. I mean, what do you think?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that picture of It's this picture of Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and he's walking down an aisle past a crowd of people with VR goggles on, like virtual reality goggles on, and he's just kind of like smiling dopily to himself because he's probably thinking like, all these people are in this false reality that I just created, through the virtual reality stuff, and here I am in the real world, being able to do anything I want to them. I can control the reality. I can exist outside the boundaries of their programmed limited reality. So, and then by definition, that makes me a god compared to them, because I'm the one who created their universe and they're the ones who live in it. And I'm the one who's outside the universe. So I get to control them. So for me, substituting real reality with a false reality is just a way to draw a smaller circle so that whatever draws it can remain outside the circle and everyone else inside of it. And then therefore they can control it. Who's ever inside, they can program it, and they can maintain some sort of a asymmetric power advantage over those that are inside the matrix, so to speak.
So interesting. No, I see it. Okay. I totally can see and or resonate with what you're talking about. And I'm kind of curious how this correlates with what I see on more of like a day-to-day basis, which is, as you know, I see a lot of entities, I sense a lot of entities, and pretty much everyone has a lot of entities, and this affects their intelligence. I've totally seen this. When you have entities, you just become dumb, like IQ dumb, but all different kinds of intelligences too, that aren't just IQ dumb, because like IQ is a very, 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 very specific thing. But people being able to like calculate things that should make sense is hard for them. And also they become very confused, which is, related to this intelligence thing. So like, what do you think about the role of, let's just say, entities in general, making people dumb, and everyone having entities and not even being able to tell that they have entities? And this might be going too far, but I'll just throw it out there. These people then becoming afraid of the truth. It's so inverted, and it's almost as if like everyone's acting evil, because if you're afraid of the truth, that's like almost like the definition of evil, right? Right. I mean, it's one definition of evil. So like, and you can see it's really easy. You can just tell someone, I think you have entities. Are you, they get all scared and they feel overwhelmed and all this kind of stuff. So like, okay, so what do you think about entities making you dumb, entities making you confused, which is related to dumb, but slightly different? And then also, if you have enough of this going on, you start to even become afraid of the truth. And therefore you just like embody evil. Like, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah. Well, I think it speaks to true intuition being tied to the level of being or essence. Okay. Because being and essence is it's the quality of your sentience. The quality of your consciousness has to do with your being and your essence. That's how you would describe it. And so if your being and your essence is good, or is a part of you that's good, the part of you that's higher, then that's what's going to link you up with truth with a capital T, with intuition and all that sort of thing, right? Okay, so what I'm saying is, if your being is good, then you're going to have the intuition to tap into higher truth. Okay, if you're outside this body, if you're outside of the human life and you're in your greater self, you don't really need much intellect, because intuition is the intelligence of your soul, of your consciousness. It's the intelligence of the higher part of your being, right? And so it's only when you're here in this world that you need intellect to kind of navigate and steer around, and so on. And when you're here, I guess the best thing you can hope for, being in a human body with a human brain, is that you've got a very sharp intellect, good reasoning skills, critical thinking, but you also have a very strong intuition, so that all that thinking and perceiving and wisdom stuff is grounded in truth, is grounded in objectivity. So that's like the best case scenario for at least for me as a human. So what if you then, so the next level down below that, if you were to like knock it down a notch, would be take away intuition, and all you have is intellect. Well, in that case, you're just like a professor that just maintains the status quo. You're just teaching the next generation of robots or something like that. Okay. Now, if you were to knock it down one more step, it would be having an intellect with a false intuition. So an intuition that comes from entities or negative beings or cultural programming or whatever, like a negative agenda that biases your intellect towards negative ends. So now you're smart, you're very intellectual, but you're using that intellect towards bad ends, towards deceiving people, whether you know it or not, you're using it towards deceiving people and leading people astray and so on. Okay. Now take it down one more notch below that. And what would that be? That would be having false intuition without even intellect. So now you can't even think straight. You can't even be cunning about it. All you are is a ball of lies, of negative biases, of shadow, of evil. And so I think that level, that's where you start finding what the entities themselves are like. A lot of times they're irrational. They're not necessarily thinking long term. They're just very impulsive. They're almost like wolves or sharks on an energetic level, where they just want to feed, they just want to manipulate, and they just want to try to get at cracks in your aura any way that they can to bring you down. And that's just at the level of like demonic or predatory beingness or essence. And at that level, once you're at that level, you're totally, not only are you cut off from truth, but you're scared of it, or you hate it, or you're kind of repulsed by it. Why? Because earlier I mentioned how intuition and goodness and truth and beauty has to do with having a good essence being tied to the higher part of your being. And this, because it's based on lies, shadow, ego, everything predatory like that, it's the opposite of that. So the opposite of that would be some sort of a predatory, negative, evil essence to their being, which is what defines a lot of these entities, in my opinion. So I think the evilness goes with dumbness in many ways. It goes with that, because if you were to concentrate a person to be only the purest of evil, then they would just be this irrational, frenzied, demonic, monster in a way. It's only when you start adding intellect into it that they start functioning better in society. But now they're like white collar criminals, or deceivers, demagogues, things like that. And so there's this whole scale between just pure, good, divine intuition, all the way down to pure evil, false intuition. This being driven by this dark, evil energy, which a lot of entities are. And some people are completely taken over by these entities. So that's their primary motivation in life, to harm others, exploit others, just defeat all the base material impulses that they have. And that's why they're ultimately dumb, because they're too dark to even have a shining, bright intellect to go with that.
It's interesting. I want to go in two different ways. I'll just spit them out because I might forget, and you just go with the one that's more interesting to you. Like, I often tell people that entities are dumb. Like, you don't have to be worried of them because they're like really stupid. Entities are so stupid, and they're really like short-term thinking as well. However, when you go to the like evil, demonic, like, like multi-thousand-year beings that just jump from bodies to bodies, or they don't live in bodies, but they scare the F out of, like, they're very smart. These ones are really, really smart. And I'm not exactly sure how to like talk about both, except kind of place them on your scale maybe. The other thing is a completely unrelated topic, totally unrelated, but it was coming to me as you were talking earlier. It was like about this thing, but earlier in what you're talking about, like, can we define at some point intelligence versus being smart? Is there a difference? Is it just a matter of semantics? Because the more I go down the route that you've seen me go down, I don't care. I just don't care about whatever I used to think of as whatever would prove me to be smart or prove me to be intelligent. However, I think the genius is just like, like, it's really interesting. And so I don't really know how to separate or talk about it. It's more like, for me, how I experienced in my life, like what I like or I don't like. I'm like, oh, this feels nice. So that I just stay there more. And then I'm like, that hurts my head. I don't like that. And for someone else, it might be kind of hard, because like sometimes it's hard for me to calculate like numbers, which is truth. So you'd think that I should be able to calculate numbers, but it's very painful. But my body knows when the time is right. So it's different. Does that make sense? And so like, and I think, I'm quite accountable. Like, I'm time accountable, and I'm accountable for things, but the way I go about it is completely different. It's not by being like 47 minutes plus 15 minutes is X minutes into the next hour. It's harder for me to do that. It's really hard for me to do that. So anyway, dumb entities versus hyper intelligent, scary fucking demons.
Hmm.
That's one topic. The other topic is just my personal experience and like, I don't know what to say about it, like smart versus intelligence. And like, I think before I probably would have been considered an extraordinarily intelligent person, but right now I feel like there's like a level beyond that would refuse to do an IQ test. But
Yeah.
you know, so there's I'm talking about two different things here. I don't know what's more interesting to you, but go for it.
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, as far as like being considered smart by people here, smart in an effective way that it makes an impression on them. I mean, at a deep level, that sort of smartness usually comes from a combination of intellect and intuition, right? But here's the thing: the better your intuition, the less intellect you need to be smart in this world, right? Because someone might not necessarily even need to have, let's say, gone to school, but if their intuition is high enough, they'll always make the right decisions. You know, they'll always be where they need to be, doing the things they need to be doing, and they can actually have a very successful, happy, fulfilling life because their intuition guides them wherever they need to go. Whereas someone else who, let's say, they've got very little intuition, they're going to need all the intellect that they can get to navigate their way through the wilderness, so to speak. You know, because so it's like being blindfolded and having to use like special tools and a walking stick and you know all these accoutrements to make it through the forest. Whereas someone with intuition just has eyes and they can just see, oh, I need to go there, and you know, there they go. So there's a trade-off, right, between intellect and intuition, where you can have one or more of the other, but as long as they add together to the same baseline, you can be considered smart. So what you're doing, for example, you've changed in life. You said you were a straight A student, right? You were a straight A student. Although, I mean, even back then you had your psychic gifts. So, but what you're doing now is it feels to me like you're definitely shifting more into heightening your intuition and living by your intuition. Would you say that's correct?
You know, right now in my personal life, I don't need to calculate much. And when I have to, I find it very difficult because it comes hand in hand with being masculine. And so like, for example, if I have to hold space for someone, oh my God, you know, from the day before, I'm like gathering up my energy to like be masculine because usually students need me to be masculine. But in my day-to-day life, I hardly have to be masculine at all. And yet everything gets done. I feel like I take care of myself better than ever. And my self-love is like through the roof, you know? And so, yeah, I don't think much. It's hard to say, like just stuff doesn't come into my head. But I think the originality is there. I mean, like way, way more than before. And, you know, it's also interesting. I don't know if I'm going off topic and this is not even what you're talking about at all, but like back when I was a university student and I was making poems, I had to write poems on schedule because I had like weekly classes and you had to produce. Sometimes that was really rough, right? Because you just don't have that much originality in you to create like a good work once a week. And so there's a lot of grinding it out. And you just do something, you know, and hopefully there's a spark of something in there. At least one of the lines is good or something. But what I feel like in my life now is like, first of all, it's hard to talk about. This is more of a feeling. But second of all, I'm not doing anything. So there's no grinding out of anything. And therefore there's no effort and there's no attempts or nothing's difficult. Therefore, if I'm holding space for someone and needing to be in my masculine, that feels difficult. Like I can do it, I'm really good at it, but it takes a lot of energy from me that I normally wouldn't expend in my day-to-day life. And so I find that more and more distasteful, to be honest. Like, because just being feels so much better than showing up for someone and being more masculine than them and tracking them, watching what they're doing and keeping them in a container and helping them feel safe. That's a lot of effort compared to what I do in my day-to-day life. And also if I come up with an original idea, I don't come up with it. It comes to me is more what it feels like. And more, I feel more like a fish where before I used to like really like concentrate on a topic, like for a whole week, if I'm preparing for a talk or something, you know, I'm just thinking, lots of notes. It's like 24/7, I'm thinking about it. Tons of good ideas, tons. Excellent talk. I mean, I can totally stand behind those kinds of talks. But right now, I don't know if I ever want to do that.
Mhm.
And if I do, it comes from such a very different place. And
Mhm.
maybe you know what I'm talking about more than better than I can describe it to you right now. You just know what I'm talking about. But like, yeah, I am a little confused about the whole thing. I mean, I don't really care. That's the thing. I also don't
Mhm.
care. But like, but I'm curious what, because you had a ranking system of like intuition and intellect, da, 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 da. And I think, yeah, maybe some of it is just kind of just one little foot touchdown here, and the rest of me not so much. So I just don't care. You know, you could call it detachment, but it doesn't even feel like detachment, because detachment feels like a something. I just really don't care, which feels like a nothing.
Yeah.
um, yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that made sense to you
Mhm.
or
Yeah,
answered
I
what
think
you're asking.
no, it totally does. Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on each person, their life path, their destiny, or what they've chosen for themselves, their situation, as to how much they do need to calculate. Because like in your case, I mean, like obviously, if your job were as an engineer right now, you'd have to do way more calculations, right?
Yeah.
Versus where you're doing. But the thing is, you don't want to. I mean, you're not on that path because you don't resonate with it, and you don't need that. So that's why your situation is right for you. It gives you the opportunity to be as you are right now. You know, like in my case, because I do a lot of writing and I'm into science, music, and a lot of trying to figure things out. So I do have to like do a lot of research and think through it, really, really crank through it. And so yeah, my intellect has to be on in high gear a lot of time. But even though it is, I never like ignore or put aside the intuition part. And so when I, for example, do contemplation in my notebook, I'm not just writing down what I read, what I remember, what I learned. I'm also brainstorming, and I'm really like looking within myself and feeling out non-verbally and intuitively solutions to the questions and problems and mysteries that I'm pondering. So and then once like an idea does come through, see, for a lot of people, when the intuition comes through, they're okay with leaving it at that. It's like like you get a feeling like a book or an author or something that they're saying is off. Like, oh, I don't resonate with it. It's fine, and you can walk away from it and be okay. Like, okay, good job. You avoided that problem. You steered clear of a potentially problematic source. But in my case, because I also want to explain things to people a lot of times, I take that intuition. Well, I take that intuition. I take that intuition and um, I don't quit with it until I've logically unpacked it and put it into words, analyzed it, and boiled it down to a very clear and concise statement, like a concluding statement, which then I can put on my website or put it out in a post or tweet or something and share it with people. And so, the whole nonverbal thing, I always have to like bring it through the intellect down into a presentable form. And that's just the way I work. That's how I built most of my website and the three books that I've written. Most of that stuff in there comes from this process. But if I weren't doing that, if I weren't publishing for the world, um, I'd be very comfortable with just being more in intuition and not always having to boil it all the way down intellectually, through analysis and everything, and just kind of going with what I feel with and resonate with. Um, but like I said, it all depends on what you're doing, what you're here to do, as to what tools you need. Maybe you need more intuition, maybe you need more intellect. Just go with what works for you.
That's interesting, because there's almost like two, I don't know if the right word is dichotomies, but there's like two dichotomies at play here. It's like, how of the world do you want to be, or do you think you are? Are you really, really of the world? Then you probably need like equal parts intuition and intellect, or intuition, yes, kind of like you need equal parts masculine, feminine, or whatever. And the more you are of this world, the more masculine I think is necessary, right?
Mhm.
Because you're dealing with reality, like 3D world reality. And if you're not so much of this world, if you're a little bit floating up there, then you can afford to be a little bit more feminine, because you're just not dealing with this world so much. And you're definitely not going to like engineer the bridge next door. Like that's someone else's job. You're more feeling,
Mhm.
and like just
Yeah.
having an experience. And um, also what's interesting is just being masculine or being feminine. So like where you are in terms of how much of this world you are sort of determines how masculine you need to be. And I guess that's kind of interesting because I think there's this idea that like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm talking out of my butt here. So let me just say something and you let me know if it lands or not. But like there's this idea that you need kind of like equal parts feminine and masculine. Like that's balanced, you know? But maybe that doesn't apply so much if you're like straight up in the 5D, then maybe you can be way more feminine, like way, way, way more feminine, and to have some sort of like masculine between balance between masculine and feminine as we understand it. When you're up there, it doesn't make so much sense. That's too much masculine for up there, you know? And also like lots of food. You don't want to eat too much food when you're up there either, because that's too much food for up there. But you need way more food if you live here. You need way more food if you're like building that bridge and using your physical body, and that's what you're doing. So there's, to me, this is kind of interesting, like the necessity of one versus the other. That it doesn't necessarily have to be in quotation marks in balance if you are not necessarily of this world either. And, you know, you and I have different genders. That might also correlate with how much we enjoy one versus the other, because I think now how I teach, this sounds so weird, but like, oh, it sounds so gross, but like best, I can't think of a different word, but like now is to be with someone, like really be with someone. And that's when spontaneous, incredible things happen, like incredible ahas and the feelings that come forth. I was never able to hold space for people like that in the past when I was more in my masculine, you know, and so perhaps, you know, you and I just teach differently, and how we teach is obviously a little bit more like, you know, based on one versus the other. In my case, it's my vibe and my feeling and like my ability to be attuned to you, which is very, 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 very feminine. So I think that's interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're totally more direct, personal, spiritual, soulful, working at the heart level, you know, like a direct connection with someone. So it's definitely more, it's more like soul to soul, mind to mind. Whereas with me, because my background was in science and engineering, physics and engineering, so I came at it definitely from a more like intellectual angle, but I acknowledge the necessity of what you're doing. And I think in my case, I have enough of a touch of that I'm not just all intellectual. You know, I'm just not like. So I try to make it. I'm mindful of the person that I'm communicating to when I write or when I talk online, in order to get into their consciousness and help them understand that way. You know, whereas if I were only intellectual, I would just blast them with information and, you know, get all snooty if they can't understand it. You know, that's the arrogant academic way. I'm not. I'm anti academia, despite having, you know, they've been through my years of college. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, and I do acknowledge and appreciate the pathway that you follow. Yeah.
So interesting. Do you care at all to revisit smart versus intellectual or intelligence or scary demons?
Yeah. I actually, yes, you're right. Yeah, I had almost forgotten. I was going to say an interesting point about that. So my point was, let's say you're just an average human right now, an average person. Okay, you've got your mix of dark and light within you. You know, masculine and feminine, intellect and intuition. You know, intuition is probably not there too much, but typically, if you're a person like this, and one day you have an awakening and you decide, you know, or you feel compelled to become, you know, more spiritual, what does that usually look like? Usually, it looks like them, well, not only like meditating and having a simpler life and, you know, kind of scaling back the complexities and the BS in life, but typically they kind of scale back the intellect. You know, they stop being a type A personality and they kind of relax more. They adopt more of the feminine aspect. Okay, and if you were to take that to its ultimate conclusion, I think it would be someone who doesn't really rely on their intellect all too much, but they're very intuitive and very heart based. You know, like very feminine, flowing like water. You know, like water, or you know, like a hermit in a cave, just meditating and being one with nature. You know, that sort of thing. But here's the thing: I think that mode can only last so long in your evolution before you realize something like okay, like you realize like I'm pure now, or I'm pure enough now. I'm one with my being enough now that now I feel like I should be of service to others, or I feel like I should strive towards understanding the universe and how people work and how the world works in order to be of greater service to them. And I think at that point, that's when intellect gets introduced back into the equation, but at a much higher level. Because now, not only is your being intuition and your intuition like at super high levels, but now you're adding intellectual understanding to it. And those two things together results in a very high level of wisdom. So if you think about esoteric masters, just esoteric masters or higher beings, like let's say on what some people would call fifth density or a higher dimension or whatever, they're not just positive, fluffy bunnies. You know, they're not just intuition. They're not just goodness. They're also very smart. I mean, they also know what the deal is. They know how to work with people. They know how to tell you exactly what you need to hear to spur on your evolution. And if they wanted to, they could explain to you how the universe works. You know, how people work and just all the kind of stuff, right? So they have the knowledge, they have the wisdom, and they have the intellect in addition to their goodness. And that's what makes them even higher than the next highest thing above us, which is just, you know, pure fluffy goodness. So I'm thinking that dynamic also happens on the inverse. Because earlier I talked about how if you're just pure evil, you know, just pure animalistic, demonic evil without much of an intellect, yes, you're very purely evil, but I think you can only be on that path for so long before you start to devolve, or I guess evolve in a negative direction towards having intellect added back into the equation. But now the intellect is at a much higher level of demonic cunning. And that's what makes these ultra scary, you know, super powerful high level demons so dangerous, is that they're not just distilled pure evilness, but they also have a lot of occult wisdom and cunning and intelligence to act on that and to manifest it, you know, to accomplish their evil ends. So I do think like on both ends of the spectrum, you've got extremely high beingness or essence in a particular direction and intellect mixed on top of it. And I guess that makes sense because if you think about creation as a whole, God or the infinite creator, whatever you want to call it, not only is it pure goodness, and pure love, but it's also like pure intelligence and pure wisdom. So there's a higher divine reasoning or reason to it as well, and that's why they call it the logos, because it's truth and a higher divine kind of reasoning. So it makes sense that even on the evil side, that there would be likewise a higher level of intellect there as well.
I like that explanation. It makes sense, especially because these demons I've seen that are like really scary and cunning, they've lived a long, long time. You know, they're not like your everyday entity. They've been on Earth for thousands of years, and they have a lot of power. So that makes sense to me. I'm kind of curious what you have to say about. I just encounter this so much, and I'm kind of curious what you have to say about intuition and intelligence, and how that has any kind of relationship to someone having fear of evil.
Fear of evil. Do you mean fear like I'm a victim kind of fear, or more like I hate evil and I'm gonna not have anything to do with it?
Interesting. I could take it one step further, because most people are more evil than they want to think or admit or recognize, because whatever they're unconscious of, a lot of evil happens there. Either they're evil to themselves or they're evil to other people. And a very easy way to see this is like, if you have an addiction and addiction isn't so good for you, but you can't help it, you know, this is evil in and of itself living in your body, you know, and you don't have any mastery over it, obviously, because you're still addicted. So this is, you know, a lot of people have evil in their system, but no one likes to identify as evil. Even evil doesn't like to identify as evil, right? Like even evil likes to think of itself as good. I'm a good guy. I'm doing good stuff. This evil thing I'm doing, it's good. It's helping people. You know, like evil lies even to itself. So there's a little complexity there that in my question, because even evil doesn't like to identify as evil. But when I see people completely scared of entities, maybe they're new to the concept of entities and they're like really scared and like it's really clear that they have entities, I think it's like dumb to be afraid of entities. I think it's like lacking intelligence to be afraid of entities. And also it's not trusting your intuition either, you know? And like, I guess I could talk about this further, but I'm just a little bit more curious, like, what do you think about that? What do you think about one's intelligence level and intuition level, which means you're probably on Earth somewhat, and just having this immediate, do I have entities? how many do you think I have? And like, like, or just like feeling
Mhm.
like overwhelmed by your own entities and feeling like you can't do anything about it. And, or like just wanting to ignore it, like
Yeah.
that, you know?
Yeah, well, see, that's the issue with the intellect itself, is that because it doesn't have, because by itself it doesn't have an objective frame of reference and everything's relative to it.
Right.
Um, that therefore, what people consider evil is basically only that which is more evil than they already are. Whatever I am, that's for me, that's the norm. That's like zero is like the normal. And if that person there is even worse than me, then I consider that person evil. And if someone is a little bit less evil than me, then I consider that person good. See, that's this real weird relative scale that they have going on. But in an absolute sense, yeah, you guys are all messed up. I mean, I messed up. We're all messed up to a degree, because that's just what being human is. And to me, we have to accept that. See, the thing about the intellect is it's good at lying. It's good at rationalizing. That's what it does by itself. And it's only when it's grounded to intuition that it has any connection to the absolute, right? So if you don't have that connection, then you're able to just invert and lie and justify and rationalize. And so, I mean, most of our existence, especially in modern society, I don't know if it's just Western or all societies, for the most part, it's all, I mean, society is held together by lies. When most people talk and converse with each other, they're very cognizant of not crossing any boundaries, like crossing any lines and peeling back the veneer of social politeness. And they want to see themselves as good, and they want to see each other as good. And even if you hate someone and you hate their guts, a lot of people will just kind of put on a smile and lie to their face and kind of have this polite interaction. And they're afraid of conflict, because conflict leads to the revealing of truth, of what's behind the mask.
Yes.
And so a lot of times people avoid conflict, and they just try to keep everything polite to allow society to function. But society only functions because of these lies. And if everyone were to drop their lies all of a sudden, if everyone were to be able to see each other's true nature, society as it exists right now would not be able to exist at all. Like civilization wouldn't be able to exist. We would probably have to transform into a much higher thing, but we can't get there without the total dissolution of the world as we know it. So people just don't want to go there, so they don't even start pulling on the thread of the sweater. And that's why they just lie to each other and lie to themselves. And internet's full of lies, media's full of lies, politicians lie. It's what keeps the world together and keeps it as it is. So it's kind of like a knife that's in someone, and if you pull it out, the person's going to die, so you just leave it in. It's like we're kind of, a lot of people are trapped in this false society based on lies, and you can't take that away without destroying the host. So just leave the knife in, just keep lying to yourself, keep lying to others. And one way to do that is to convince yourself that you don't have entities, that you're not evil in any way, and you're just a good person because you have good intentions. But you're only saying that because you're comparing yourself to everyone else who's even worse than you, versus comparing yourself to the absolute or what's higher and above you, which a lot of people just don't know. They don't know how messed up things really are here. And I mean, not to go off on a tangent, but I do think that's one reason why we have this amnesia of who we are. Because if we didn't have that amnesia, we wouldn't have the anesthesia to be able to tolerate and survive in this environment of lies and illusion. It's the anesthesia that we need to be plugged into this matrix, so to speak.
Yeah. I remember at the beginning of our conversation when I'm like, I see what you're saying, but I would say it so differently. Like, I feel the same here. I don't know if even what I'm going to say reflects back to you at all, anything that you think you said, but like, it's just what comes to mind as you're talking is why I love this idea of this, like, the knife and the human and et cetera, kind of like participating in the evil around you, because it's just easier to do that in many ways than to like break the whole system down.
Yeah.
To me, this really strange conundrum of so many people thinking that they're good and wanting to be on a healing journey, especially in my case, the people that I interact with, they want to be on a healing journey. They want to heal themselves. And I'm like, but you're super evil and you don't want to admit that. And you're scared of the evil within you. And so like whatever in quotation marks healing you're doing is like this like fake thing on top of this thing you're really, really not looking at. And then on top of that, where I come from, it doesn't really serve you to be afraid of any kind of evil. inside of you, outside of you, it doesn't really matter. It just is in this world. It just is. And it's just a fact of this world. There are many worlds where there, like let's say we break down society and go to a different dimension, it wouldn't be there as much. But to me, it's there because it creates drama. And I think that internal conflict, of like, I kind of hate myself, which is why I have my addictions. And I don't have enough love for myself to overcome my addictions. This creates a lot of drama. And I feel like we're just in a dimension of drama. And so, I'm afraid of myself. I'm afraid of others. I don't trust others. I don't trust myself, this kind of stuff. Evil flying all over the place and the society being based on lies, like, it's intense, but I think it creates the most drama. And I personally think that we're just in a dimension that explores drama, and we like it, very few people who have like some kind of addiction, whatever the addiction is, very few people prefer to end the addiction because they love the freedom of not having the addiction. They'd rather just kind of pull the covers over their heads and just keep the addiction until they die, and they don't have the willpower to do much about it. And whatever, like, I don't really care. I just think it's just an aspect of this dimension. So that's my response to you. Again, this may not seem as if it has any kind of relationship to what you just said, but it's what came to my mind.
It does. No, it totally does. Yeah, I mean, it totally does, because, I mean, yeah, of course, we're addicted to. Well, yeah, I mean, people are addicted to their addictions. They're addicted to their addictions.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's the truth. Yeah.
I would also say that they're addicted to entities. And so, like, to me, this is why it's also really stupid to be afraid of entities, because entities serve you. Like, your own entities, the ones in your body, they are helping you do exactly what you are right now, and without those entities, they wouldn't be fucking with your head so much. Sorry, I used the F word, but like, whatever came out of my mouth. So like, without those entities in your system, they wouldn't be effing with your head so much to the point where you would naturally do what feels good to you, even if it feels bad to you. And that's what feels good to you. So I feel like your entities serve you. So I get additionally frustrated and like exasperated with people who are afraid of entities, especially the entities in their system. I'm like, you're the mastermind. You attracted them into your life to serve you so you can be this level dumb to have this level drama. Does that make sense to you?
Like, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, from what I'm seeing, the dark entities, they are catalysts for your growth. They're catalysts for your growth, but only if you play your part in playing that out. Because the problem is, the problem is the entities, they profit off your misery. Yes. Whether they get energy from it or pleasure or sport or whatever. They profit off your misery, so they want to keep it going as long as they possibly can, even if it's beyond the point where okay, now it's no longer good for you. I mean, you're not learning any lessons anymore. You're just in like repeat loop mode. And the problem with loop mode is you only have so many years to your life. So eventually it's going to end. It can't keep going forever. And so you miss out on all these other opportunities because you got addicted to that weird loop that you have with your entities. So at a certain point, it has to stop with a particular set of entities where you accomplish the purpose of why they're in your life in the first place. And I think that the sooner you can get to that point, the better. And that's why it's good to be proactive. And so if someone were to tell me I've got entities and here's what they're doing, I should be grateful. Like, I shouldn't be scared. I should be grateful, because then now I can start contemplating, okay, well, what purpose does it serve? What's happening with it? And what do I have to put up with or go through or put an end to in order to fulfill that purpose? Whereas if I weren't aware of any of it, I might wind up in a loop for decades, going over the same old patterns.
Yeah. So interesting the way you put it. Really, really interesting. It's so interesting because I usually agree with what you have to say. I just never would have explained it that way. And I think maybe that is perhaps because the fundamental difference in who we are as people. And well, I guess I'm curious. Well, I'm not that curious. I feel like we can start to wrap up. And I'm curious if there's anything else that you want to say that you haven't said already on this topic that you feel like, oh, you really want to express this.
Well, I do think that the purpose of darkness is to help us find and reveal our inner light. It creates a what do you call it, like a foothold or a counterpoise or counterpoint that we can push off of to become more of what we are. But it's like I said, it's not always guaranteed that it's going to play out that way because of our addictions and us lying to ourselves and our ignorance. Like sometimes life says, hey, it's time for you to learn this lesson. It's time for you to move on. But because we're scared or addicted or ignorant, we either don't hear that signal or we push it away or we try to deny it. And that's how we get stuck in these perpetual loops and don't move on. And so that's why self-awareness, self-examination, tapping into your intuition, and being proactive with what life gives you in terms of experiences and lessons. That's why that is so important, because that helps you kind of clear the plate, helps you squeeze the most amount of juice out of each experience that life is giving you, so that you can pack the most in this life. So I think honesty and self-awareness, which is all a part of intuition and intellect and humility. I mean, it all goes together. I think that's the way to go.
So I'm curious if you agree or disagree with this summation. Today, we talked about something which was so interesting to me, that the idea of intelligence and the idea of intuition is predicated upon us being human beings with a being. So you can't be a robot. You have to be a real human, and have some kind of awareness of your being, and that there is a larger truth out there, truth with a capital T, of which we are reflections. So intelligence and intuition are just functions of being beings as a part of this larger framework. And because there is evil, which has distorted our situation from the ultimate truth, we're living in messed up, weird stuff, and we're being told lies that aren't the truth, and we're being taught that that is the truth. So we don't even know what truth is anymore, unless we have access to our intuition, in my opinion. So there's like this conflict. There's a conflict between us and, like, let's say society, us and the world. And there's an inner conflict because now evil has infiltrated our systems, and there's some part of us that doesn't even like us or doesn't like the truth. We'd rather live in the lie. And so there's like inner conflict and outer conflict. And intuition and intelligence are innate tools we have, as long as we're not like overtaken by this evil, which can happen, to help us get back to the truth of who we are and understand the truth of this reality, which is, I think, the whole game to begin with. Honestly, I think that's the whole game. Like, truth, ultimate truth out there created us, which are aspects of it, to just see itself, find itself all over again, right? And so to me, what we were saying, which is also really interesting, is that depending on, let's say, your vibrational level or commitment to being on this earth plane, very committed to being on this earth plane, intuition and intelligence, very, very important tools. Goes really, really, really high up. That intellect, maybe not as important, because that masculine component to intellect helps you navigate this world, and also, were we saying something else?
Yeah, I was just saying.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just saying how eventually, I think intellect or intelligence comes back into the picture just at a higher level.
Right. When you go up there and when you go down there, which is also so interesting. Yes, I like it. It's so interesting, because if you do this path as a human, then you are the universe seeing itself. You're like, oh my God, I'm so smart. It's like the universe doing that, but like through your personality. Right. I'm curious, do you have anything else to add to that, like summation, or like any other or any quibbles, or like, yeah, today was so interesting. Do you have anything?
No, I mean, yeah, that was very well said, and I think that sums it up. I mean, I think we got a pretty good snapshot of this topic. It's pretty good.
So interesting. What was interesting for me personally is we didn't talk so much about that false intelligence. Like, that was like, whatever, like we mentioned it, you mentioned it, or whatever. We talked about it slightly, but like true intelligence, we're on that. And I loved how, for you, and I guess for me as well, it's like for you, you were clear on this. For me, not so much. I was, but like in listening to him, like, okay, I can adopt your idea, like how true intelligence is so closely interrelated to true intuition. So yeah, thanks for today. This is nice.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Okay. Talk to you next time. Bye.
All right, bye.